Section 1. You're standing in your kitchen late at night, phone blowing in your hand, rereading a message you already answered twice today. It's from someone you care about, asking for help again, and you feel that familiar mix of responsibility and resentment tighten your chest. You tell yourself you should be patient, but part of you is tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Here's the uncomfortable question: what if the reason your relationships keep draining you isn't bad luck or empathy gone wrong, but a quiet habit of choosing people you feel compelled to fix? What if the role you keep stepping into isn't partner or friend, but rescuer? The pain usually doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as canceled plans because someone else is going through something. It shows up in money quietly leaking away to cover emergencies that never seem to end. It shows up as mental clutter, that low-level stress where you're always anticipating the next crisis text. If nothing changes, the cost compounds. You lose evenings, then weekends, then years. You lose focus at work, patience with yourself, and eventually a piece of your self-respect because you keep giving from an empty place. By the end of today, you'll be able to recognize the pattern that pulls you toward projects instead of partners. You'll have a few calm, usable sentences that help you step out of fixer mode without blowing up a relationship. And you'll know how to choose connections that feel like shared effort instead of unpaid emotional labor. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. If you want steady Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships every week, this is the channel for you. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's map where we're going so you don't feel lost. First, we're going to slow down and name the exact belief that keeps pulling you into fixing roles, even when you promise yourself you won't do it again. Next, we'll look at why that belief feels so right in the moment, especially if you're competent, caring, and used to handling things. Then we'll practice stepping back without guilt, using language that's calm and clear instead of defensive. After that, we'll talk about how to notice early warning signs before you're already invested and exhausted. Finally, we'll put all of this into a real, messy situation where emotions run high, and you'll see how responding instead of rescuing changes the outcome. Before we go further, notice something about how this usually plays out. You don't wake up thinking, "Today I'll parent another adult." It happens in small steps. Someone shares a problem. You listen. They don't take action. You offer advice. They ignore it. You step in. Somewhere along the way, your role quietly shifts from equal to manager. And because you're capable, the system rewards you in the short term. The crisis calms down. You feel needed. There's relief. But underneath that relief is a slow erosion of balance. Many people confuse this pattern with kindness or loyalty. They tell themselves, "This is just what commitment looks like," or "If I don't help, who will?" The Stoics would ask a different question: what is actually in your control here, and what isn't? You can offer support. You can state your boundaries. You cannot make another adult take responsibility for their life. When you try, you trade your energy for an illusion of control, and that trade never pays well. You might recognize this pattern at work, too. You end up covering for a coworker who always misses deadlines. You rewrite their emails so the team doesn't look bad. You pick up slack because you're better at it anyway. At first, you're praised for being reliable. Over time, you're overloaded, resentful, and quietly angry at people who never agreed to change because they never had to. The reason this lesson matters is that rescuing feels like action, but it often blocks real change. When you absorb the consequences meant for someone else, you teach them that nothing has to shift. Meanwhile, your nervous system stays on alert, waiting for the next thing to break. That's not a partnership. That's chronic management. As we go on, I want you to hold one simple idea loosely in your mind: adults grow when they're allowed to carry their own weight. That doesn't mean being cold or uncaring. It means being clear about where your responsibility ends. There's a quiet strength in stepping back that most people never practice because it feels uncomfortable at first. You'll notice throughout this lesson that we're not aiming for dramatic confrontations or clean, perfect boundaries overnight. We're aiming for small, repeatable choices that protect your time and attention. Choices that let you show up as yourself, not as a permanent solution to someone else's chaos. Pay attention to how your body reacts as we talk about this. If you feel a twinge of guilt or a voice that says, "But if I don't help, I'm a bad person," that's not a signal to stop listening. That's the pattern being named. You don't have to agree with everything right away. You just have to stay curious. In a bit, we'll walk through a Friday night situation where this urge to fix hits hard, right when you're tired and most likely to cave. You'll see exactly how one small pause and one sentence can change the whole trajectory of the evening without creating drama or distance. Section 2. The first change you need to make is this: stop building relationships around someone's potential and start building them around their demonstrated pattern. Not what they say they want. Not what they promise when they're emotional. Not the version of them you can almost see when things are good. The pattern. Because when you fall for potential, you quietly accept an unpaid job, you become the person who keeps the relationship functioning. And if you never stop doing that, the price shows up everywhere: your sleep gets lighter, your attention gets scattered, your money gets temporarily drained, and your life starts to feel like a constant state of maintenance instead of progress. This is the trap for capable people. You're not naive. You can tell something is off. But you also have a strong tolerance for discomfort, and you've learned that you can carry a lot. You don't walk away quickly because walking away feels like failure, or cruelty, or wasted effort. So you do what you've always done: you try harder. You explain things more clearly. You offer help. You make it easier for them to show up. You become the reminder system, the emotional regulator, the schedule coordinator, the one who absorbs the consequences so the other person doesn't have to. And the relationship might even look fine from the outside, because you're doing the work of two people. Why does this feel so normal at the moment? Because your brain rewards hope like it's progress. A small improvement, a heartfelt apology, a sweet message after a fight, these are intermittent rewards, and intermittent rewards are powerful. They keep you engaged. They make you think, "See? It's in there. They can do it." And you attach yourself to the possibility. You start relating to the future you imagine, not the present you're living. The Stoics would call this a problem of judgment. You're not suffering only because of what's happening. You're suffering because of what you keep telling yourself it means: that if you love well enough, explain well enough, or endure long enough, you can pull a different person out of the same behavior. A more focused, steadier version of you does something different. You treat consistency as the requirement, not the reward. You stop letting potential negotiate the terms of your life. You don't need to demonize anyone. You don't need to turn cold. You just stop entering contracts based on hypothetical performance. Here's the microscript. It's short, and it works because it pulls you back to reality without drama. I'm responding to what's happening now, not what might happen someday. That's it. That's the sentence that interrupts the trance. Say it once in your normal voice. Say it again, slower, so your body learns it. I'm responding to what's happening now, not what might happen someday. Now let's make it real in a way you'll recognize. You're talking to someone you've been dating for a couple of months. You met on an app. The chemistry is strong. They text you constantly when they're in the mood. They're warm when it's convenient. But when it's time to show up, when you set a plan, when you ask for clarity, when you need basic follow-through, things get vague. I've had a crazy week. I'm dealing with a lot. I'm not great with pressure. They're not lying, necessarily. They may genuinely be struggling. But struggling doesn't automatically equal ready. And your mind starts doing the familiar math. You calculate their pain as credit toward future behavior. You imagine what they'll be like once they feel secure, once work calms down, once they heal, once you prove you won't leave. The old reaction looks like this. They cancel on Friday night 2 hours before you're supposed to meet. You feel disappointed and irritated, but you swallow it. You send a supportive message. You offer an alternative plan. You tell yourself it's fine. Then you sit there with your evening suddenly empty, phone in your hand, waiting for them to make it up to you. Maybe they do, with a sweet text. Maybe they disappear. Either way, your nervous system stays activated. You're not just disappointed, you're unsettled, because you're trying to stabilize something that isn't stable. Now the new response. They cancel again. You feel that first wave rise, and you don't punish them, but you also don't rescue the moment. You take a breath before you type. You remind yourself, you're responding to what's happening now. And you send something calm and clear, I hear you. I'm looking for something consistent, so I'm going to step back. No lecture. No sarcasm. No debate about their intentions. You're not asking them to argue with you into staying. You're not offering a therapy session over text. You're simply aligning your behavior with the reality you've been experiencing. Here's the part that matters. When you do this, the world doesn't end. Your chest might feel tight for a minute because you're breaking an old role. You might feel guilty because you're used to being the understanding one. But then something else happens. Your mind gets quieter. You get your evening back. You stop acting like the relationship is a fragile object you have to protect from the consequences of their choices. You let adulthood be what it is. A person either shows up or they don't. This applies outside dating, too. Think about a friend who only calls when something is falling apart. Every time you see their name, your stomach drops a little because you know it's going to be a crisis. The old version of you picks up immediately, rearranges your plans, gives advice for an hour, sends money for just this once, and then stays emotionally involved for days, replaying the conversation and worrying. The new version of you still cares, but you don't confuse caring with solving. You pause. You use the sentence. And you choose a response that protects your capacity. I care about you, and I'm not able to carry this tonight. I can talk tomorrow afternoon for 15 minutes. That's not abandonment. That's adult friendship. That's you staying inside your limits. If you're thinking, but what if they really need me? Good. That question is exactly why this lesson matters. Because fixer mode convinces you that urgency equals responsibility. It doesn't. Sometimes urgency is simply someone else's unmanaged life. Sometimes it's a pattern of offloading. And when you keep absorbing it, you train them, without meaning to, that you'll always be there to stop the discomfort. That prevents growth. It also prevents your own life from moving forward. So here's your tiny action, and it's measurable by tomorrow. Choose one relationship where you've been operating on potential instead of evidence. Then do a simple reality audit. Not an emotional essay. Just facts. In the last 4 weeks, write down 3 moments where the pattern showed itself. For example, canceled plans, broken promises, emotional dumping without follow-through, repeated I'll change with no change, money emergencies that repeat, or conversations that circle without action. Keep it specific: dates, behaviors, outcomes. Then pick one boundary that matches the pattern. Not to punish them. To protect your life. Something like, you don't send money anymore, you stop making last-minute plan accommodations, you only respond during a set window, or you stop offering solutions unless they ask for one specific thing they'll do next. And now, a slow practice moment, because your body is usually where the resistance lives. Right now, take 3 slow breaths with me. In, hold, and out. Again. In, hold, and out. One more time, a little slower. In, hold, and out. As you breathe, bring to mind the person you've been holding together in your head. Notice the urge to explain them, defend them, or rescue them from your own clarity. You don't have to fight that urge. Just name it quietly, there's my fixer reflex. Then repeat the microscript once, like you're teaching your nervous system a new default. I'm responding to what's happening now, not what might happen someday. If you want to make this even more practical, add one small internal question before you say yes to anything. If nothing changed for 6 months, would I still want this? Not because you're predicting the future, but because you're checking whether you're trying to buy a better outcome with your effort. When you ask that question, you stop signing imaginary contracts. You stop paying today for a promise that never arrives. This isn't about becoming harsh. It's about becoming accurate. Accuracy is kindness to yourself. When you stop relating to potential, you stop bargaining with your time. You stop living in emotional debt. You start trusting your own perception again. And once you can trust your perception, you can finally do the next step. You can separate compassion from responsibility and care from control. Hold on to that sentence, because we're going to stress test it soon in a real moment where you'll feel the pull to fix hard and fast. And next, we're going to talk about why you, specifically, keep ending up in this role, how being dependable becomes a magnet for people who want relief more than growth, and how you can change that without losing your warmth. Section 3. The next shift builds directly on what you just learned, and it's this: stop taking responsibility for other adults' emotions. Not their safety. Not basic kindness. Their emotions. Because the moment you believe it's your job to manage how someone else feels, you quietly hand over control of your time, your words, and your decisions. If you never change this, you'll keep editing yourself, over-explaining, and delaying your own needs just to keep someone else comfortable. This is especially hard if you're emotionally aware. You can read the room. You notice tone changes. You sense disappointment before it's spoken. Somewhere along the way, you learned that if you adjust fast enough, you can prevent conflict. So you do. You soften your messages. You add disclaimers. You say yes when you mean maybe. You delay honesty because you don't want to hurt them. But what actually happens is slower and more corrosive. You start living around their feelings instead of inside your own values. And that's exhausting. Why does this pattern hook you so deeply? Because your nervous system learned early that emotional stability came from anticipation. If you could predict moods, smooth things over, or fix problems before they exploded, you stayed safe. That skill might have served you once. Now it's costing you. You're no longer responding to what's happening, you're pre-managing reactions that haven't even occurred yet. A steadier version of you understands something simple: other adults are allowed to feel disappointed, frustrated, or uncomfortable. Those feelings are not emergencies you must solve. Here's the exact sentence to practice when you feel yourself sliding into emotional management mode: I can be kind without managing how this lands. Say it quietly once. Then again, slower. I can be kind without managing how this lands. Now let's ground this in a situation that probably feels familiar. You're at work, maybe on Slack or email. A coworker asks you to take on something that clearly isn't your responsibility, but they phrase it in a way that tugs at you. I'm really overwhelmed. I don't know who else to ask. You feel the pressure instantly. The old reaction kicks in. You start worrying about how they'll feel if you say no. You imagine them stressed, resentful, maybe talking about you later. So you say yes, or you say I'll try, which means yes. Your workload grows. Their pattern stays the same. Now picture the same moment with a different response. You still feel that tug. You still care. But you pause before answering. You remind yourself that their feelings are theirs to experience. You type something simple and respectful: I can't take that on right now, but I hope you find a solution. You don't add a paragraph. You don't explain your whole week. You don't apologize for existing. And yes, they might feel disappointed. That feeling will pass. What lasts is that you didn't abandon yourself to prevent someone else's temporary discomfort. This shows up even more intensely in personal relationships. Think about a partner or friend who reacts strongly when you set limits. Maybe they get quiet. Maybe they get emotional. Maybe they accuse you of changing. The old version of you rushes into repair. You clarify. You reassure me. You walk back what you said. Not because you were wrong, but because you can't tolerate the emotional tension. You mistake calm for cruelty and discomfort for danger. The new response looks different. You state your boundary. Then you let the reaction exist. You don't punish them. You don't escalate. You don't rescue. You might say, "I hear that this is hard for you," and then you stop talking. That silence is doing important work. It allows them to process their own feelings instead of outsourcing them to you. That's not abandonment. That's respecting adulthood. Here's a concrete North American example. You're co-parenting or sharing responsibilities with someone who often drops the ball. They forget pickups. They miss deadlines. When you bring it up, they get defensive or emotional. The old reaction is to soften the message so much that it loses meaning. You end up saying, "It's okay, I know you're busy," while quietly rearranging your life again. The new response uses the microscript. You speak clearly, "I'm not able to cover for missed pickups anymore. We need a plan that works." When they react emotionally, you don't counterreact. You let the feeling be there without fixing it. Over time, this either leads to real change or real clarity. Both are better than endless management. Now let's talk about the tiny action, because this pattern doesn't break through insight alone. Today or tomorrow, choose one low-risk moment to practice emotional non-management. It could be as small as not responding immediately to a guilt-tinged text, or saying no without adding extra justification, or ending a conversation when it starts turning into emotional dumping. Decide in advance what you'll do. For example, if someone reacts emotionally to my boundary, I will pause and not explain further. That's the action. Clear. Measurable. And now, a slow practice moment, because this is where most people feel it in their body. Right now, take one slow breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. Let it out through your mouth. As you breathe, imagine someone reacting emotionally to a boundary you've set. Notice where your body tightens. Chest. Throat. Stomach. That tightness is the old reflex saying, "Fix this." Don't fight it. Just name it silently, "That's not mine to manage." Take another breath. And again, quietly repeat the sentence, "I can be kind without managing how this lands." If you want to deepen this practice, add a short pause rule to your life. When someone reacts emotionally, you wait one full breath before responding. That breath is not passive. It's you choosing response over reaction. It gives your nervous system time to remember that you are not in danger just because someone else is uncomfortable. This idea is closely aligned with a Stoic principle you might recognize from Epictetus and the Enchiridion: some things are up to us, and some things aren't. Your tone, your honesty, your boundaries, those are up to you. Someone else's emotional reaction is not. When you blur that line, you suffer unnecessarily. When you respect it, you gain steadiness. What often surprises people is that relationships don't become colder when you stop managing emotions. They become clearer. Some people step up. Some drift away. That information is valuable. It tells you who can meet you as an equal and who is relying on you to carry more than your share. As you practice this, expect discomfort at first. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're changing a role you've played for a long time. The urge to over-explain may flare up. Let it pass. Each time you don't manage someone else's feelings, you reclaim a small piece of your attention and energy. Keep this idea close, because the next step builds on it. Once you stop managing emotions, you'll start noticing how often you rush to solve problems that aren't yours to solve. In the next part, we'll talk about how to pause before offering solutions, and how that pause changes the entire dynamic of your relationships without turning you into someone you don't recognize. Section 4. The next shift is subtle but powerful. Stop offering solutions unless you're explicitly asked for them. This matters because the moment you jump into problem-solving mode, you move yourself into a position of responsibility that wasn't actually assigned to you. If you never change this habit, you'll keep feeling mentally busy with other people's problems long after the conversation ends, carrying plans and contingencies that were never yours to hold. If you're someone who thinks quickly and sees patterns easily, this habit probably feels like competence. Someone shares a problem, and your mind immediately generates options. You see the fix. You see the shortcut. You see the steps they could take. And because you care, you start offering those steps. At first, it felt helpful. But over time, you may notice something frustrating. They rarely follow through. They nod, agree, thank you, and then come back with the same problem next week. That's not because your advice was bad. It's because when you solve problems for people instead of with them, you take ownership away from them and quietly take it on yourself. Why does this pattern persist? Because problem solving creates a sense of control. When someone else's situation feels chaotic or uncomfortable, giving advice calms you. It reduces your anxiety. It makes the conversation feel productive. But there's a cost. The other person doesn't have to fully sit with their own discomfort, so nothing actually changes. Meanwhile, your brain stays engaged, tracking whether they'll do what you suggested. You've added another open loop to your mind. A more focused version of you understands this difference. Listening is not the same as fixing. Support is not the same as strategy. Adults grow by making their own decisions and dealing with the outcomes. When you rush to provide answers, you interrupt that process. Here's the exact microscript that creates space without sounding cold. Do you want support, or are you looking for ideas? That's it. Simple. Neutral. Say it once. Then say it again, a little slower, so it feels natural in your mouth. Do you want support, or are you looking for ideas? Now let's place this in a situation that likely feels very real. A friend texts you about money stress. Rent is due. Credit cards are piling up. They're overwhelmed. The old reaction happens almost instantly. You start calculating. You suggest budgeting apps. You mention side hustles. You offer to look over their expenses. Maybe you even lend money, telling yourself it's temporary. They feel relieved. You feel useful. And a week later, nothing has changed. They're still stressed. You're still thinking about their finances. You've taken on mental weight that doesn't belong to you. Now imagine the same moment with a different response. They start venting. You listen. You let them talk. And when there's a pause, instead of jumping in, you ask the question. Do you want support, or are you looking for ideas? They might say, honestly, I just needed to vent. In that case, your job is done. You don't fix it. You don't advise. You don't follow up with reminders. Or they might say, I need ideas. Only then do you offer one or two options, briefly, without turning it into a plan you'll manage. You stay present, but you don't become the architect of their life. This shift is even more important in romantic relationships. Picture a partner who regularly talks about being unhappy at work. They complain about their boss, their schedule, their lack of motivation. The old you listens, then suggests resumes, networking, new careers, mindset shifts. You start pushing gently. They resist. You feel frustrated. Eventually, you start resenting them for not doing what you think is obvious. But notice what happened. You turned their dissatisfaction into your project. And when they didn't act, it felt personal. The new response changes the dynamic completely. They talk. You listen. You reflect back what you hear. And when the moment comes, you ask the question. If they say they just needed to vent, you stop there. If they say they want ideas, you offer one suggestion and then step back. You don't monitor. You don't remind me. You don't carry it. That responsibility stays with them. Over time, either they take action or they stop venting to you as if you're a solution machine. Both outcomes protect your energy. This doesn't mean you never help. It means you help consciously, not reflexively. You choose when to engage your problem-solving mind instead of letting it hijack you. Here's a clear North American work example. You're on a Zoom call. A colleague complains about a process that's broken. The old you jumps in with fixes, workflows, suggestions, maybe even volunteering to draft something. You end the call with extra tasks you never planned to take on. The new you listens, then asks a version of the script. Are you looking for feedback or just flagging this? If they're just flagging it, you don't act. If they want feedback, you give it briefly. You don't adopt the problem as yours unless it actually is. Now for the tiny action, because this habit changes through repetition, not intention. Over the next 48 hours, notice the first time someone brings you a problem. Before offering any solution, pause and ask the question. Out loud, if possible. If not, say it internally and wait to see what they ask for next. That's the action. One pause. One question. No fixing unless invited. And now a slow practice moment, because this is where your reflex to help lives. Right now, take a slow breath in through your nose. Let your shoulders drop as you exhale. Think of someone who regularly brings you problems. Notice how quickly your mind wants to jump ahead. That urge is familiar. It's not wrong. It's just not always useful. As you breathe, repeat this quietly. I don't need to solve this to be supportive. Say it once. Then again, slower. You might feel a flicker of discomfort when you don't offer solutions. That's normal. You're breaking a pattern where usefulness was tied to fixing. Over time, something surprising happens. Conversations get lighter. You leave interactions with more mental space. You stop replaying other people's issues while trying to fall asleep. And people who genuinely want to grow start taking more ownership because you're no longer doing the thinking for them. This idea connects to a core Stoic insight: focus your effort where it actually has power. Your words, your presence, your boundaries, those matter. Someone else's choices do not respond well to force, even gentle force disguised as help. When you stop solving unassigned problems, you free up attention for your own life. Keep this in mind as we move forward. Once you stop managing emotions and stop solving problems by default, you'll start to notice another pattern: how quickly urgency pulls you back into fixer mode. In the next part, we'll talk about how to slow urgency down so it stops hijacking your decisions, especially in moments when everything feels like it needs to be handled right now. Section 5. The next shift is about urgency, because urgency is what pulls you back into fixer mode even after you've promised yourself you won't. The instruction here is clear: stop treating other people's urgency as your emergency. This matters because urgency short-circuits your judgment. When everything feels like it has to be handled right now, you stop choosing, you react. And if you never change this, your life will keep getting organized around other people's deadlines, moods, and crises instead of your own priorities. Urgency is persuasive. It creates a sense of moral pressure. Someone sounds stressed. Their message is marked urgent. Their tone is panicked. And your body responds before your mind does. Heart rate up. Thoughts racing. You feel compelled to act, to reply, to fix, to move. In those moments, you're not asking whether this is actually your responsibility. You're asking how fast you can make the discomfort go away. Often, you don't even realize you've crossed a boundary until later, when you're drained and resentful. Why does urgency work so well on you? Because your nervous system associates speed with safety. At some point, you learned that quick action reduced tension. Maybe conflict calmed down when you stepped in. Maybe chaos eased when you took charge. So now, when urgency appears, your system says, move now, think later. But urgency is not the same as importance. And it's almost never the same as responsibility. A calmer, more focused version of you learns to insert time where urgency tries to erase it. Here's the microscript that creates that space without escalating anything: I'm not able to handle this right now, but I'll look at it tomorrow. Say it once. Then again, slower, so it feels steady instead of apologetic: I'm not able to handle this right now, but I'll look at it tomorrow. Let's put this into a situation you'll recognize. It's a weeknight. You're finally settling down after a long day. Your phone buzzes. It's someone close to you, stressed and upset. The message is long. Emotional. There's an implied need for immediate reassurance or action. The old reaction kicks in instantly. You drop what you're doing. You read it 3 times. You start typing. You offer comfort, advice, maybe solutions. You stay mentally engaged for the rest of the evening, even if the conversation ends. You go to bed tired, not just from the day, but from carrying someone else's urgency. Now imagine the same moment with a different response. You read the message. You notice the urgency. And instead of obeying it, you pause. You take one breath. You remind yourself that not everything urgent is yours. You send a short, calm reply using the script. There's no defensiveness. No explanation. Just clarity. I'm not able to handle this right now, but I'll look at it tomorrow. You put the phone down. The evening continues. You sleep better. And when tomorrow comes, you respond with a clearer head, or you realize it didn't actually require your involvement at all. Urgency also shows up at work, often disguised as professionalism. A late-night email marked ASAP. A Slack message that says, "Can you take a quick look?" The old you jumps in, even if it means working unpaid hours or pushing your own tasks aside. You tell yourself it's temporary. But temporary life becomes a pattern. People learn that if they escalate urgency, you'll respond. And your boundaries quietly dissolve. The new response doesn't make you unreliable. It makes you consistent. You decide, in advance, what qualifies as truly urgent for you. Maybe it's a real emergency. Maybe it's a client issue during business hours. Everything else waits. When someone sends an urgent message that doesn't meet your criteria, you don't argue with it. You don't shame them. You simply don't let it dictate your actions. Over time, the world adjusts to the speed you set. This is especially important in relationships where drama and urgency are habitual. Some people live in a constant state of now. Every feeling is immediate. Every problem is pressing. And if you're responsive, you become the regulator of that emotional system. You calm things down. You talk them through. You absorb the intensity. But notice what happens. Their capacity to self-regulate doesn't grow. Yours shrinks. You start feeling on edge, waiting for the next interruption. Here's another North American example. You share finances or responsibilities with someone who frequently creates last-minute emergencies. Bills they forgot. Deadlines they didn't realize were today. The old reaction is to scramble, cover, transfer money, make calls, rearrange your plans. You feel stressed, but you also feel necessary. The new response is harder at first. You pause. You acknowledge the issue without taking it over. I can't fix this tonight. We'll talk about a plan tomorrow. They may be upset. They may push. But that discomfort is part of reality catching up. When you stop absorbing urgency, consequences land where they belong. Now, the tiny action, because urgency loses power when you pre-decide your response. Tonight or tomorrow, set one simple rule for yourself. For example, no emotionally loaded replies after 8 p.m. Or no work messages answered outside business hours unless it's truly critical. Or no financial decisions made on the spot. Pick one. Write it down. And the next time urgency hits, follow the rule instead of the feeling. And now, a slow practice moment, because urgency lives in the body. Right now, take a slow breath in. Notice if your shoulders are tense. Let them drop as you exhale. Imagine an urgent message arriving. Feel the impulse to react. Then imagine inserting a pause. Just one breath. In that breath, nothing bad happens. You're not failing. You're choosing. Take another breath and quietly repeat, urgency doesn't decide for me. Say it once more, slower. You might worry that delaying makes you uncaring. It doesn't. It makes your care sustainable. When you respond from calm instead of pressure, your words are clearer. Your boundaries are steadier, and you're less likely to agree to things you'll later resent. Urgency thrives on immediacy. It weakens when you add time. This idea connects to something Marcus hints at in Meditations, when he reminds himself not to be dragged around by appearances. Urgency is an appearance. It looks important. It feels pressing. But not everything that looks urgent deserves your immediate action. When you remember that, you stop being pulled off course by every alarm. As you practice this, notice how often urgency is paired with a lack of planning on someone else's part. That's not a moral failing. It's just information. And when you stop compensating for it, people either adapt or reveal that they were relying on you to buffer them from reality. Keep this close as we move forward. Once you stop letting urgency run your decisions, you'll start to see another pattern clearly: how often fixing becomes a way to avoid your own discomfort. In the next part, we'll look at how staying with your own discomfort, without acting it out, breaks the rescuer role at its root. Section 6. The next shift goes deeper than behavior. It's about what you're avoiding when you rush to fix. The instruction here is uncomfortable but freeing. Stop using fixing other people as a way to escape your own discomfort. This matters because fixing feels active, noble, and useful, but very often, it's a distraction. And if you never change this, you'll keep organizing your life around other people's problems so you don't have to sit with your own uncertainty, loneliness, or unmet needs. This is the part most people don't want to look at. When someone else is in crisis, your role is clear. You know what to do. You know how to show up. You feel needed. That sense of purpose can be soothing, especially when your own life feels stalled, unclear, or emotionally quiet in an uncomfortable way. Fixing gives you direction when you don't know what direction to take for yourself. It gives you movement when stillness feels threatening. Why does this work so well on your nervous system? Because discomfort without an obvious task feels like danger. Unanswered questions, unsatisfying relationships, or a vague sense that something in your life isn't aligned can create a low-grade anxiety that's hard to name. Fixing someone else gives that anxiety somewhere to go. It turns inward unease into outward action. A calmer, more self-honest version of you learns to recognize this move for what it is: avoidance dressed up as care. Here's the microscript that interrupts this pattern before it turns into action. I don't need to fix this to avoid my own feelings. Say it once. Then say it again, slower, with a little space between the words. I don't need to fix this to avoid my own feelings. Now let's make this concrete. You're single, or in a relationship that feels unsatisfying in ways you don't quite know how to address. Your evenings feel a bit empty. There's a question in the background about what you actually want next, but you keep postponing it. Then someone in your life has a problem. They're overwhelmed. They need advice. They need support. And suddenly, your calendar fills up. Your attention is occupied. That quiet question about your own life fades into the background. You feel useful again. But notice what happened. Your life didn't get clearer. It just got louder. Or imagine this at work. You're unsure whether you're growing, stagnating, or just tolerating your job. Instead of sitting with that discomfort, you volunteer for extra projects. You help coworkers solve issues that aren't yours. You become indispensable. From the outside, it looks like ambition. On the inside, it's avoidance. You stay busy so you don't have to ask harder questions about where you're headed. The old reaction in these moments is automatic. Discomfort arises. You spot someone else's need. You move toward it quickly. You feel relief. The new response requires a pause. You notice the urge to fix. And instead of acting on it immediately, you turn your attention inward for just a moment. You ask yourself, what am I not wanting to feel right now? That question alone changes the dynamic. It doesn't mean you never help. It means you help consciously, not compulsively. Here's a very ordinary North American example. A friend calls you late in the evening, upset about their dating life. They want to talk it through again. You've had this conversation many times. The old you drops everything, listens for an hour, gives reassurance, maybe even helps draft texts. You hang up feeling drained but oddly relieved, because the evening passed without you having to face your own restlessness. The new you notices something different. You still care, but you're honest with yourself. You're tired. You've been avoiding your own feelings tonight. So you respond differently. I hear you. I don't have the capacity for a deep dive right now, but I can talk tomorrow. Then you sit with the quiet that follows. That quiet is where growth actually happens. This doesn't feel good at first. Sitting with your own discomfort can feel exposed. You might notice sadness, boredom, fear, or frustration. You might realize you're unsure about a relationship, a career path, or how you've been spending your time. Fixing used to protect you from that awareness. When you stop, the feelings surface. That's not a problem. That's the work. Here's the tiny action, and it's intentionally inward-facing. The next time you feel a strong urge to fix someone's issue quickly, delay your response by 10 minutes. Just 10. In that window, don't distract yourself. No phone. No email. Sit or stand quietly and notice what's present in you. Are you anxious? Lonely? Unsettled? Bored? You don't need to analyze it. Just name it. Then decide how you want to respond, instead of letting the urge decide for you. Now for a slow practice moment, because this is where your system learns it's safe to stay with yourself. Right now, take a slow breath in through your nose. Let it fill your chest. Hold it briefly. Then let it out slowly. As you breathe, imagine not fixing anything for a moment. No solving. No advice. No rescuing. Just being here. Notice any tension that arises. That tension is not a signal to act. It's a signal to stay. Take another breath. And quietly repeat the sentence, I can stay with my own discomfort. This idea aligns with a Stoic insight that's easy to miss. Peace doesn't come from controlling events, but from aligning your actions with reality. When you fix to avoid feeling, you're trying to control your inner state through outer action. It works briefly, then backfires. When you allow discomfort without immediately reacting, it loosens its grip. Over time, something important shifts. You start making choices based on what actually matters to you, not on who needs you most. Your relationships become more balanced because you're no longer using them to regulate yourself. And the urge to rescue loses its intensity because it's no longer serving as emotional anesthesia. As you get better at this, you'll notice another layer of the pattern. When you stop fixing to avoid your own discomfort, you'll start seeing how often guilt pulls you back in anyway. In the next part, we'll talk about guilt, how it keeps you stuck in rescuing roles, and how to respond to it without hardening or shutting down. Section 7. The next shift is about guilt, because guilt is the lever that keeps pulling you back into fixing even after you've learned to pause, delay, and step back. The instruction here is precise. Stop treating guilt as proof that you're doing something wrong. This matters because guilt is often just the emotional residue of breaking an old role, not a signal of actual harm. If you never change this, guilt will keep overriding your boundaries, quietly convincing you to return to patterns that drain you. If you're used to being the reliable one, guilt shows up fast when you don't rescue. It sounds like, I should do more, or they're going to think I don't care, or what kind of person leaves someone like that? That voice feels moral. It feels serious. And because you value being decent, you listen to it. But notice what guilt is doing here. It's not asking whether your action is fair or sustainable. It's asking whether you're still playing the role people expect from you. Guilt works because your nervous system associates approval with safety. When you meet expectations, things stay calm. When you break them, tension appears. And your system reads that tension as danger. So you move to relieve it by stepping back into fixer mode. A more grounded version of you learns to separate two very different things, guilt that comes from causing real harm, and guilt that comes from disappointing someone by no longer overfunctioning. Here's the microscript that helps you make the distinction in real time. This guilt is about a role change, not a moral failure. Say it once. Then say it again, slower, so it lands. This guilt is about a role change, not a moral failure. Now let's look at how this plays out in everyday life. Imagine a family member who regularly leans on you emotionally. They call when they're upset. They expect long conversations. They rarely ask how you're doing. They hold you answer every time, even when you're exhausted. When you finally don't pick up, guilt hits hard. You picture them hurt or alone. You feel like you've abandoned them. So you call back, even though you didn't want to. The new response doesn't eliminate guilt. It reinterprets it. You feel the guilt, yes. But instead of obeying it, you pause. You remind yourself that you didn't cause harm, you chose a limit. You might send a short message instead of calling. Or you might wait until the next day. The guilt rises, peaks, and then slowly fades. That fade is important. It teaches your nervous system that guilt doesn't require immediate action to be survivable. Here's another North American example, this time in a romantic context. You're dating someone who struggles with follow-through. You've already decided to stop compensating. They ask you for help again, framed in a vulnerable way. You say no, calmly. They look hurt. Maybe they say, I guess I'll just deal with it alone. The old you rushes to fix that feeling. The guilt feels unbearable. The new you notices the guilt and stays put. You don't attack. You don't retreat. You let the moment be uncomfortable. That discomfort is not cruelty. It's the friction of a new boundary forming. Guilt also shows up after the fact. You set a boundary. You go home. And then your mind replays the interaction. You think of better ways you could have said it. Kinder words. Softer tone. You imagine their reaction. And guilt creeps in, pushing you toward a follow-up message to smooth things over. Sometimes that follow-up is appropriate. Often, it's just guilt trying to reassert the old pattern. The difference becomes clearer when you ask one quiet question: did I act in line with my values, or am I just uncomfortable? If you were respectful, honest, and within your limits, then the guilt is not a warning. It's a withdrawal from an old identity. Here's the tiny action, because guilt loses power when you don't let it dictate behavior. The next time you feel guilty after setting a boundary, don't correct or explain for 24 hours. No follow-up texts. No justifications. No apologies for having limits. Let the feeling exist without acting on it. If, after 24 hours, you genuinely believe repair is needed, you can choose it then, from clarity, not pressure. Now for a slow practice moment, because guilt often shows up physically. Right now, take a slow breath in. Notice where guilt lives in your body. Maybe it's a heaviness in your chest or a knot in your stomach. Don't push it away. Let it be there. As you breathe out, imagine not fixing anything. Just staying. Take another breath. And repeat quietly, discomfort doesn't mean I did something wrong. Say it again, slower. This practice matters because guilt often spikes right before real change. When you stop rescuing, the people around you may react. Not because you're wrong, but because the system is adjusting. Guilt is the emotional echo of that adjustment. If you mistake it for a moral verdict, you'll reverse course. If you recognize it as part of growth, you'll stay steady. There's a Stoic idea that fits here without needing much philosophy: you're responsible for your intentions and actions, not for managing everyone else's approval. When you confuse those two, guilt runs your life. When you separate them, guilt becomes just another feeling, unpleasant, but not authoritative. Over time, something surprising happens. Guilt becomes quieter. Not because you care less, but because your actions and values are aligned. You stop feeling guilty for saying no, because no longer means abandonment, it means accuracy. And accuracy is respectful, even when it's uncomfortable. As you continue practicing this, one more pattern becomes visible. When guilt no longer controls you, you start seeing how often fixing was actually preventing honest conversations. In the next part, we'll talk about how to replace rescuing with directness, how to say what's true without escalating, lecturing, or withdrawing, so relationships either rebalance or reveal themselves clearly. Section 8. The final shift before we put everything together is about directness. The instruction here is simple but challenging. Replace rescuing with clear, adult truth. This matters because rescuing avoids discomfort in the moment, but it creates confusion over time. Directness feels risky up front, but it reduces long-term tension. If you never make this shift, you'll keep having the same conversations in different forms, hoping things change without ever naming what actually needs to be said. Rescuing and indirectness often travel together. When you don't want to upset someone, you soften your words until the message disappears. You hint. You suggest. You imply. You hope they'll get it. And when they don't, you feel frustrated and unseen. The problem isn't that you weren't kind enough. It's that you weren't clear. A steadier version of you understands that clarity is not aggression. It's respect, for yourself and for the other person. Why does directness feel so hard if it's actually healthier? Because your nervous system associates truth with conflict. Somewhere along the way, you learned that saying what you really think leads to arguments, withdrawal, or emotional fallout. So you adapted. You became careful. You became diplomatic. You became indirect. That strategy may have kept the peace once, but now it keeps you stuck. You end up managing dynamics instead of addressing them. Here's the microscript that anchors this shift into something usable. I want to be clear so we don't keep repeating this. Say it once. Then again, slower, so it feels grounded instead of confrontational. I want to be clear so we don't keep repeating this. Notice what this sentence does. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't diagnose. It isn't in demand. It names the pattern and the intention. It moves you out of fixer mode and into adult communication. You're no longer trying to engineer a reaction. You're stating reality and letting it land. Now let's put this into a situation that probably feels familiar. You have a friend who's chronically late. You've adjusted for years. You arrive late yourself. You wait. You make excuses for them. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, but inside, it is. The resentment builds quietly. The old reaction is to keep accommodating and then feel irritated afterward. The new response is direct but calm. I want to be clear so we don't keep repeating this. If you're more than 15 minutes late, I'm going to leave. You're not angry. You're not punishing. You're stating what you will do. That's not rescuing. That's clarity. Or take a romantic relationship where you feel like you're doing more emotional labor. You've tried being patient. You've tried being understanding. You've tried hinting. Nothing changes. The old you might keep giving, hoping effort will be noticed. The new you name it. I want to be clear so we don't keep repeating this. I need more consistent communication to feel connected. You stop managing their response. You stop backing away from your own words. Whether they meet you there or not becomes information, not a verdict on your worth. This also applies at work. You're carrying more than your share. You've subtly signaled overload. You've helped, covered, and stayed late. The resentment is starting to leak into your tone. The direct response isn't dramatic. It's factual. I want to be clear so we don't keep repeating this. I can't take on additional tasks without reprioritizing my current workload. You don't soften it until it's meaningless. You don't over-explain. You let the clarity do its job. Directness works because it collapses ambiguity. Ambiguity is where fixer mode thrives. When things are unclear, you fill the gaps with effort. When things are clear, effort either meets reality or stops. This doesn't guarantee the outcome you want. It guarantees honesty about what's possible. Now here's where people get stuck. They think directness will damage the relationship. Sometimes it does. But notice what's really happening in those cases. The relationship wasn't built to handle truth. It was built to function as long as you carried more than your share. When clarity breaks it, it's not because clarity is wrong. It's because imbalance was holding it together. Here's a North American example that ties several threads together. You're cohabiting or sharing responsibilities with someone. Chores, finances, planning, things keep falling to you. You've hinted. You've reminded. You've adjusted. Nothing sticks. The old you keeps compensating. The new you chooses one moment and speaks plainly. I want to be clear so we don't keep repeating this. I'm not willing to manage this alone anymore. We need a shared plan, or I'm stepping back from covering the gaps. That sentence might lead to discomfort. It might lead to resistance. But it ends the cycle of silent resentment. Here's the tiny action, because directness becomes easier when it's practiced deliberately. Think of one relationship where you've been indirect to keep the peace. Write down one clear sentence that names the pattern and your boundary. Not a speech. One sentence. You don't have to deliver it today. Just write it. The act of writing clarifies your own thinking. It moves the truth from fog into form. And now, a slow practice moment, because directness often tightens the body. Right now, take a slow breath in. Feel your feet on the floor. Let your shoulders relax as you breathe out. Imagine saying your clear sentence calmly, without rushing or defending. Notice any fear that comes up. That fear is old information. It doesn't get to decide for you anymore. Take another breath. And quietly repeat, clarity is not cruelty. Say it again, slower. As you practice this, something important shifts internally. You stop relying on effort to create closeness. You start relying on truth. That changes how you feel in your body. Less bracing. Less anticipation. Less mental rehearsal. You begin to trust that if a relationship works, it will work with honesty, not with you constantly adjusting yourself. This shift also frees other people. When you're direct, they no longer have to guess. They don't have to read between the lines. They can respond as adults. Some will rise to that. Some won't. Either way, you're no longer stuck in ambiguity. There's a Stoic echo here, often paraphrased from Marcus: say what is necessary, plainly, and without ornament. When you stop ornamenting your truth to manage reactions, you reclaim your voice. And when you reclaim your voice, the rescuer role loses its power, because rescuing thrives on silence and avoidance. Hold this idea close, because we're about to put everything together. In the next part, we'll walk through a real, pressure-filled moment where urgency, guilt, discomfort, and the urge to fix all show up at once. You'll see how pausing, choosing clarity, and responding instead of rescuing changes the outcome in a way you can feel, not just understand. Section 9. It's Friday night, and you're tired in that specific end-of-week way where your body wants quiet but your phone keeps buzzing. You're halfway through making dinner when a message comes in from someone you've been seeing. The tone is familiar before you even finish reading it. They're stressed. Something fell apart. They need to talk. Now. You feel that old pull in your chest, the reflex that says, drop what you're doing. Fix this. Be there. This is the moment we teased earlier, the one where you usually cave because it feels easier than sitting with the tension. You read the message again. It's long, emotional, and urgent. They're upset about work and spiraling into bigger questions about their life. In the past, this is where your evening would disappear. You'd sit on the couch, phone pressed to your ear, offering reassurance, advice, solutions. You'd feel needed for an hour and drained for the rest of the night. And nothing would really change. Tonight, something is different. You notice the urgency first. Your heart rate ticks up. Your shoulders tighten. Instead of reacting, you pause. Just one breath. In and out. You remember that urgency doesn't get to decide for you. You also notice something else. A quiet truth underneath the impulse to respond immediately. You're tired, and part of you doesn't want to fix anything tonight. That realization brings a flicker of guilt, right on cue. The familiar thought appears, if I don't respond now, I'm being selfish. You recognize it for what it is, guilt tied to a role change, not a moral failure. You sit with that for a moment. It's uncomfortable. You don't distract yourself. You don't open another app. You just stand there in your kitchen, breathing, letting the discomfort exist without acting it out. That's new. Then you type. Slowly. You don't overthink it. You use the sentence you practiced earlier in the week. I hear that you're stressed. I'm not able to talk about this tonight, but I can check in tomorrow. You read it once before sending. No apology. No explanation. Just clarity. You hit send. For a split second, your mind braces for impact. Maybe they'll be upset. Maybe they'll say something guilt-laden. Maybe you'll feel worse. That's the old pattern trying to predict and control the outcome. You notice it, and you don't follow it. A few minutes pass. There's no reply yet. The silence feels loud. You take another slow breath. You remind yourself that you don't need to manage how this lands. You go back to cooking. The food smells good. You realize you're still hungry. That feels oddly grounding. When your phone buzzes again, your stomach flips. You check it. The message is shorter this time. Okay. I get it. Tomorrow works. There's no explosion. No dramatic fallout. Just a boundary being absorbed. Later that evening, you're sitting on the couch. There's a quiet you're not used to on Friday nights. Normally your mind would still be wrapped up in someone else's crisis, replaying conversations, planning what to say next. Tonight, it's quieter. Not perfectly calm, but clearer. You notice a sense of space where there used to be tension. The next day, you follow through. You check in when you said you would. The conversation is different. You're not rushed. You listen without jumping into solutions. At one point, they start venting again, circling the same issues. You feel the urge to fix rise up, familiar and strong. And you pause again. You ask the question instead of offering answers. Do you want support, or are you looking for ideas? There's a brief pause on their end. Then they say, honestly, I just needed to vent. That's your cue. You stay present, but you don't take ownership. You don't start planning their next steps. When the call ends, you don't feel responsible for what happens next. A little later, they bring up something else that's been sitting between you for a while, communication. In the past, this kind of conversation would have turned indirect fast. You'd soften. You'd hint. You'd manage their reactions. This time, you're direct. Calm, but clear. You say the sentence you wrote down earlier in the week. I want to be clear so we don't keep repeating this. I need more consistency than we've had. There's a moment where the old dynamic almost snaps back. They get quiet. You feel that familiar urge to fill the space, to reassure, to pull back what you just said. Guilt flickers again. You notice it. You don't obey it. You stay still. You breathe. Something shifts. Not dramatically. But enough. They respond differently than they usually do. Maybe because you didn't rush to rescue. Maybe because the clarity landed. Maybe because the system is adjusting. You don't analyze it. You just stay present. That night, you go to bed earlier than usual. Your mind isn't racing. You're not replaying texts. You're not planning how to fix tomorrow. There's a sense of quiet satisfaction, not because everything is resolved, but because you didn't abandon yourself. The visible outcome is simple. You kept your evening. You slept better. You showed up the next day with more energy. And the relationship didn't implode because you stopped fixing. It revealed itself more clearly. That's what responding instead of rescuing looks like in real life. Not dramatic. Not perfect. Just a series of small pauses, clear sentences, and choices that put your attention back where it belongs. Section 10. What this episode was really about is learning how to stop parenting other adults and start responding to relationships as they actually are. Not by becoming cold or detached, and not by cutting people off impulsively, but by choosing clarity over rescuing and responsibility over reflex. When you respond instead of fix, your relationships stop draining you and start telling you the truth. First, we stepped into that familiar late-night moment where someone else's crisis tries to hijack your attention and turn your evening into damage control. Then we challenged the habit of bonding to potential instead of patterns, so you stop investing in who someone might become and start relating to who they consistently are. Next, you learned how stepping out of emotional management doesn't make you unkind, it makes space for adulthood on both sides. After that, we slowed down the reflex to solve problems that were never assigned to you, so your mind doesn't stay busy with other people's lives long after the conversation ends. Then we talked about urgency, and how inserting time breaks the spell that makes everything feel like it has to be handled right now. From there, we went deeper and looked at how fixing often keeps you from sitting with your own discomfort, and how staying with that discomfort gives you your life back. We addressed guilt, not as a moral alarm, but as the emotional echo of leaving an old role. And finally, we replaced rescuing with directness, so the truth gets spoken calmly instead of acted out through exhaustion and resentment. All of that came together in that Friday night moment, where you paused, chose clarity, and watched the outcome change without force. Here are 3 things to do today so this doesn't stay abstract. First, choose one relationship where you've been operating on hope instead of evidence, and write down 3 recent behaviors you can verify without interpretation. Then decide one boundary that matches those behaviors, not the future you've been imagining. Second, before replying to any emotionally loaded message, use this sentence once, either out loud or silently: I don't need to respond to urgency right now. Then wait one full breath before typing anything. Third, identify one place where guilt usually pulls you back into fixing, and commit to a 24-hour pause the next time it shows up. No follow-up explanations, no softening, no rescuing. Just let the feeling rise and fall on its own. If this resonated, the next lesson to watch is about how to stop confusing empathy with self-abandonment, where we go deeper into staying emotionally open without losing your center, especially in close relationships. If you want a whole library of Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships that help you live with more clarity and less internal noise, this is what we build here every week. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.